nuclear weapons may play a role in deterring conventional or CBW attack. And then, as was discussed by the Secretary of Defense and Secretary of State, as long as nuclear weapons exist, we see the fundamental role of U.S. nuclear weapons to be to deter nuclear attack on ourselves or our forces or allies and partners. We will look to continue to strengthen conventional capabilities, including missile defense, including counter WMD capabilities, in order to reduce the role of nuclear weapons in deterring non-nuclear attacks, with the objective of making sole purpose of U.S. nuclear weapons being to deter nuclear attack on the United States or our allies and partners. And with that, I'd like to turn it over to General Cartwright.
Slide. As I understand the rules, I'm going to give you a couple more slides here, try not to requote things that have already been said, and then you'll ask all questions of anybody else. Okay? On this page reflects START. START, we expect the President to, in the next 2 days, sign with President Medvedev the START Treaty. And when you look at START and look at the numbers that are associated with the reductions that will occur in START, put together, they represent 65% reduction of operationally deployed strategic nuclear weapons since the end of the Cold War. It's a 75% reduction of deployed and non-deployed, combination of the two, nuclear weapons, and an 80% reduction in the operationally deployed strategic launch vehicles. So a pretty substantial reduction since the end of the Cold War are continued here in the current START. 1,550 is the floor for deployed strategic nuclear warheads, 700 for strategic nuclear delivery vehicles. Now, that's a combination of launchers and vehicles. So, for instance, a submarine which has multiple tubes counts as multiple vehicles, 24. A bomber counts as one. An ICBM with one warhead counts as one, just to give a sense of this. We have 7 years to get to these targets that are deployed up here. The 800 number for deployed for strategic nuclear delivery vehicles is an additional 100 that are non-deployed. So, for instance, a submarine that is in refueling or a submarine that has come back, had the missiles removed, and is going through maintenance does not count actively. That allows you to have the spares. It also allows you to make transitions. The Russians are in a period of modernization, and we will enter a period of modernization during this 10 years. So as, say, a new bomber comes on and a new bomber goes out, having both of them, you have a period of time that allows you to get the old bombers out of the fleet and bring the new ones in without a period of vulnerability, so to speak. So it was in that construct that we added this additional number of 800. We will retain throughout the life of the treaty the nuclear triad, so that's the bombers, the submarines, and the ICBMs. We will, in fact, reduce the number of warheads associated with our ICBMs to a single warhead each over the life of the treaty. There are no constraints in this treaty associated with our missile defenses or our prompt global strike capabilities, read conventional. We do make substantial new investments and study efforts associated with command and control and decision times. If you have followed this activity over the years, one of the issues has been a concern about hair trigger alert statuses, and the Secretary kind of walked through what we've done with the bombers. We've done about as much as we can do with the physical capabilities and architectures of the existing weapons and platforms. So as we go into modernization, what we're studying is what can we do in that area to ensure that first we have the maximum amount of decision time for national leaders before they would enter into any decision to use a nuclear weapon. That can happen in better sensors, better command and control nets, and also in the architecture of the weapons themselves, how we would keep them safe and how we would, in fact, architect them so that they would be safe. Today, the Secretary described one of the activities was what's called open ocean targeting. And so what else can we do? That study begins, actually, for the command and control began about 3 years ago. For the architecture of the next generation weapons for us over the life of the 10 years, we will be looking at the study at what we can do. The studies will start in FY11 to look at the actual vehicles themselves and what might be done. We also, in this one, talk significantly about high-level dialogues and establishing them with the Russians and the Chinese. And this is an effort to get more transparency, more confidence, understand the intent of each other, understand where modernization programs are going to reduce the potential for instability or misinterpretation. And we'll endeavor, in the case both of the Russians and the Chinese, to have these high-level dialogues. Next slide, please. Strengthening regional deterrence. We've done an awful lot of work here. A lot of the work is in its early stages. The Ballistic Missile Defense Review talked about the phased adaptive approach, but it is the missile defense capabilities at the theater level to allow us to have that be an element of our deterrence. In addition to that, our general purpose forces, which are prejudiced but second to none. That capability, improving it, maintaining it, having a posture that's consistent with the threat out there to deter but not to overwhelm in its presence, working those and tailoring those for the regions around the world. These are critical activities that we must be able to do. We will, in fact, continue to have a capability on the tactical side, whether that's applied with a bomber or with a next-generation aircraft would be the F-35 or our current dual-capable aircraft. But having that capability out there to ensure that we can, in fact, move forward and base forward in a tactical sense for those cases where it is appropriate to do that. We're going to retire one of our weapons that's been in the arsenal for a long time. This is the Tomahawk, the nuclear variant of the Tomahawk. That will, in fact, be retired. It has really been on the sidelines and not deployed for several years, but we are going to officially retire that weapon. And we'll also spend time, as I said in the previous slide, at the regional level, working with our allies to have discussions about the credibility and effectiveness of what has been called the extended deterrent. Secretary talked extensively, and both secretaries did, about our NATO responsibilities, but those also extend into the Pacific and working with our allies there and into the Middle East and our allies there. Next chart, please. Sustaining the safe, secure, and effective arsenal. This has been an area of a lot of discussion, and I'm sure we'll have several questions here, but principally, no new testing, no new warheads. Secretary went through the criteria associated with that. No new missions or capabilities. Our life extension programs will, in fact, focus on existing tested designs. There are three principal categories of weapons: those that we refurbish, those that we reuse, and those that we replace. In the case of refurbishment, these are nuclear designs that previously were produced for the warhead type undergoing the extension. So in other words, you haven't changed anything associated with what we would call the physics package, the primary and the secondary, the nuclear part of this thing. That won't be touched. In a refurbishment, you're just working around at the components that either have aged out and become obsolete over time, or those that, by replacing them, would substantially improve the stockpile or that weapon's safety, security, or effectiveness. Okay? In the case of reuse, those are nuclear designs currently or previously in the stockpile, but from different warhead types. So we might take one from one warhead type, match it with another in order to be able to preserve that weapon. No new capability, no new mission, but that would allow us to take known, tested designs, keep them in the stockpile without having to retest or establish a test program, and allow us to keep the stockpile fresh. And then the third one, which is the one that gets probably the most discussion, is replace. And again here, we're utilizing designs not in the stockpile, but based on previously tested designs. So this one, we're allowing the space, for instance, to make changes to the primary components that would be consistent with improving safety and security. Okay? You might do any number of things associated with those components, but as long as it's aligned that way, we would do that. It still requires a presidential approval, and then the Congress would also get a look at this. They get a look at it at the transition as you go to engineering phase. They would, in fact, have a review of those types of weapons that are put in the category of replace. key. We talked about the over $5 billion over the next several years that we would put into the complex from the Department of Defense to the Department of Energy to address both the aging infrastructure, updated support to our science and technology capabilities, the recruitment and the retention of the physicists and scientists that are associated with this capability, and then a promise to renew and refresh our continued leadership focus on the nuclear mission within the department, those who lead this enterprise. Last slide. This kind of goes back and restates everything that we have talked about up until now. I think that one point that I would bring out is that the reality of the world that we live in today and the world that we anticipate living in, we have to expand the spectrum that we watch and guard against in this area. So everything from nuclear weapons being used to influence, through terrorism, all the way up to ICBMs that would be coming over the poles towards the United States. Our defensive capabilities, our deterrent capabilities must be able to address that entire span. And so a